The helicopter's rotors cut through the desert air like angry wasps. Staff Sergeant Mike "Tank" Rodriguez pressed his face against the small window, watching the endless sand dunes roll beneath them. His stomach churned, but not from the turbulence. Something felt wrong about this mission from the start. 5 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. Tank looked around at his team. 8 Navy SEALs, the best of the best, all veterans of multiple deployments. But, tucked between them sat someone who didn't belong. Sarah Chen, a 23-year-old Navy corpsman on her first deployment. Fresh out of medical training, she clutched her medical kit like it was a lifeline. "You okay, Doc?" asked Petty Officer Jackson, noticing her white knuckles. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd trained for this moment for months, but nothing could have prepared her for the real thing. The other SEALs had been polite but distant. She was an outsider in their tight brotherhood. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, their team leader, stood up as the helicopter began its descent. "Listen up. Intelligence says we've got a high-value target holed up in that compound. Abdul Rahman, the bomb maker who's been hitting our convoys. We go in fast, grab him, and get out. Simple snatch and grab." Tank frowned. In his 12 years with the teams, nothing was ever simple. The intel had been sketchy, coming from a source who'd already burned them once before. But orders were orders. "Remember, we want him alive," Hayes continued. "He's got information about planned attacks. Doc, you stay with Ramirez and cover our 6. Keep your head down and do your job." Sarah felt the familiar sting of being sidelined. She'd scored higher than half these guys in marksmanship training, but they saw her as just a medic. A liability to be protected rather than an asset. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust. The team moved out like a well-oiled machine, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats. The compound sat on a small hill, surrounded by mud brick walls about 8 feet high. It looked quiet. Too quiet. Tank took point, his rifle sweeping left and right as they approached the main gate. The silence was unnerving. No dogs barking, no voices, no signs of life at all. His instincts screamed danger, but the mission timeline was tight. They had a narrow window before enemy reinforcements could arrive. "Breach in 3, 2, 1, Hayes whispered. The explosive charge blew the gate inward with a muffled thump. The team flowed through the opening like water, each man covering his assigned sector. The courtyard was empty except for a few chickens pecking at the dirt. Sarah stayed close to Ramirez, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd practiced this 100 times in training, but the real thing felt different. The air tasted of dust and fear. Every shadow could hide an enemy. They moved toward the main building, a 2-story structure with thick walls and small windows. Tank reached the door first, testing the handle. It was unlocked. Another red flag. In hostile territory, doors were never left unlocked. The interior was dark and cool. The team spread out, clearing room by room with practiced efficiency. The house felt abandoned, as if the occupants had left in a hurry. Half-eaten meals sat on tables, and clothes were scattered on floors. "Second floor clear," came Jackson's voice over the radio. "Ground floor clear," Tank reported. Hayes' jaw tightened. This was all wrong. The intelligence had been specific about Rahman's location, but there was no sign anyone had been here for days. "Check the basement," he ordered. Tank found the stairs leading down. The wooden steps creaked under his weight as he descended into darkness. His night vision goggles painted everything in green and black. The basement was larger than expected, with several rooms branching off a central corridor. In the third room, he found what they were looking for. Not Rahman, but evidence of his presence. Bomb-making materials were scattered across workbenches. Wires, timers, plastic explosives, and detailed diagrams of American vehicles. This was definitely the right place. "Boss, you need to see this," Tank called softly. The team gathered in the makeshift bomb factory. Sarah stared at the materials with growing horror. Each device represented potential American casualties. Soldiers, Marines, maybe even civilians.
Where is everybody? Ramirez muttered.
Hayes studied the workspace. Some of the devices looked fresh, recently assembled.
They knew we were coming. This is a setup.
The words had barely left his mouth when the world exploded. The first rocket-propelled grenade hit the wall directly above them.
Chunks of concrete rained down as the building shook.
The SEALs dove for cover, but there wasn't much to hide behind in the open basement.
Contact! Contact!
Hayes shouted into his radio.
We're taking heavy fire. More explosions followed in rapid succession.
The enemy had surrounded the compound and was hitting them from multiple directions. Tank grabbed Sarah and pulled her behind a workbench as bullets began chewing up the walls around them.
How many? Jackson yelled over the gunfire. Tank risked a look out the basement window. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness from at least 6 different positions. Too many. They've got us boxed in. Sarah's medical training kicked in as the first casualty came.
Petty Officer Williams stumbled down the stairs, blood streaming from his shoulder. She forgot her fear and went to work, cutting away his gear to examine the wound. Through and through, she told him, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. You'll live, but you need to stay down. Williams nodded, his face pale but determined.
Doc, they've got snipers up there. Professional ones. These aren't just local fighters. Tank cursed. If the enemy had brought in trained snipers, this was more than a random ambush. Someone had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. They'd walked straight into a trap.
Hayes tried raising the helicopter on his radio, but got only static. Either the pilot was already dead, or he'd been forced to retreat. Either way, they were on their own.
We need to move, he decided. Staying here is suicide. Tank, what's our best exit? Tank studied the basement layout.
There was only one way out, the stairs they'd come down. But those stairs were now in the direct line of fire from at least 2 sniper positions.
Not good, boss.
They've got Overwatch on our only exit. Anyone who tries to go up those stairs is going to get picked off. Another RPG hit somewhere above them, and dust cascaded from the ceiling.
Sarah looked up nervously.
The old building wasn't going to withstand this kind of punishment for long. If they didn't get out soon, they'd be buried alive.
Jackson crawled over from his position by the far wall. I counted at least 20 fighters out there. Maybe more.
They've got us surrounded and they know exactly where we are. The reality of their situation began to sink in. 8 SEALs and 1 corpsman, trapped in a basement with limited ammunition and no way out. The enemy had superior numbers, better positions, and all the time in the world.
Hayes made the hardest decision of his career. We make our stand here. Martinez, Williams, set up defensive positions covering the stairs. Jackson, you and Ramirez take the windows. Tank, see if you can find us another way out.
Sarah continued working on Williams, but her mind was racing. She'd never been in combat before, never faced the real possibility of death. The training scenarios had been intense, but this was different. This was real.
Doc, Williams said quietly, you got a weapon? Sarah nodded, patting the pistol on her hip.
Standard issue sidearm, 15 rounds. She'd qualified expert with it in training, but shooting paper targets was nothing like shooting at people who were shooting back. Tank was examining the basement walls, looking for any weakness they could exploit. The construction was solid, thick concrete reinforced with steel rebar. No chance of blasting their way out without bringing the whole building down on their heads. Boss, we got movement, Jackson called from his window position.
They're positioning for an assault. Hayes moved to look.
In the distance, he could see figures moving through the darkness. The enemy was being methodical, setting up kill zones and covering every possible escape route.
These weren't amateur terrorists.
This was a professional military operation.
How long until reinforcements? Tank asked. Hayes checked his watch.
Assuming they even know we're in trouble, at least 2 hours.
Maybe more. 2 hours. Sarah did the math in her head. With their current rate of ammunition expenditure, they'd be out of bullets long before help arrived. And that was assuming the building didn't collapse first. Another explosion rocked the foundation.
This time, part of the ceiling gave way, dumping broken concrete and twisted rebar into the middle of the room.
The enemy was trying to bring the whole structure down on top of them.
"We need to do something," Ramirez said, his voice tight with controlled panic.
"We can't just sit here and wait to die." Hayes looked around at his team.
These were the best operators in the world, but even the best had limits. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in an underground tomb. Sarah finished bandaging Williams and moved to check on the others.
Martinez had taken shrapnel in his leg but was still functional.
Jackson had a cut on his forehead from flying debris. Minor injuries so far, but that would change quickly once the real assault began. The gunfire outside intensified. The enemy was probing their defenses, testing their response times and ammunition supplies. It was standard tactics, wear down the defenders before the final assault.
"Tank, report," Hayes ordered.
Tank had been examining the bomb-making materials scattered around the room.
"Boss, there's enough ordnance here to level half the building. If we could rig some kind of device. And blow ourselves up in the process?" Hayes shook his head. "Keep looking for options."
Sarah knelt beside her medical kit, checking her supplies. She had enough morphine for maybe 3 serious injuries, basic bandages and antiseptic for perhaps a dozen minor wounds. After that, she'd be operating with whatever makeshift materials she could find. The building shook again, and this time they could hear masonry falling upstairs.
The enemy strategy was becoming clear.
They didn't need to risk casualties in a direct assault. They could simply demolish the building and dig out the bodies afterward.
Movement on the stairs, Martinez called out. Everyone froze.
Through the dust and smoke, they could see shapes moving in the stairwell. The enemy was testing their defenses, seeing how quickly the SEALs would respond. Tank aimed his rifle at the stairway entrance but held his fire. Ammunition was precious, and they couldn't waste it on shadows and false alarms. The shapes retreated, but they'd learned what they needed to know. The Americans were still alive and still fighting.
Time for the next phase of the attack. Gas! Jackson yelled suddenly.
White smoke began pouring down the stairs. Not tear gas, but something worse.
The acrid smell burned their noses and throats.
Chemical weapons, designed to force them out of their defensive positions.
Hayes made a quick decision. Gas masks, now!
But they only had 6 masks for 9 people. Sarah found herself without protection, along with Martinez and Williams. The smoke was getting thicker, making it hard to see and harder to breathe. "Doc, take mine," Williams offered, pulling off his mask. "Keep it," Sarah said, covering her nose and mouth with her shirt.
"You're injured. You needed more." The chemical smoke was doing its job.
Their eyes were streaming, their throats burning.
Soon they'd be forced to choose between suffocation and surrendering their positions. Tank tried to think like the enemy commander.
The smoke was just the beginning. Next would come grenades, designed to force them into the open where the snipers could pick them off one by one.
Sure enough, the first grenade came bouncing down the stairs. Tank dove away from the explosion, pulling Sarah with him.
The blast was deafening in the enclosed space, and shrapnel peppered the walls around them.
"This is it," Hayes said grimly. "They're coming." Bootsteps echoed on the stairs.
Multiple sets, moving with military precision. The final assault was beginning, and the SEALs were almost out of time. Sarah checked her pistol one more time, making sure a round was chambered. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear.
Whatever happened next, she wasn't going down without a fight.
The first enemy fighter appeared at the bottom of the stairs, assault rifle ready. Tank's shot took him down instantly, but 2 more appeared immediately behind him.
The basement erupted in gunfire as the final battle for their lives began.
Outside, hidden in a sniper's nest 300 yards away, a lone figure watched the compound through a high-powered scope. The ghost sniper had been observing the entire engagement, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Soon, very soon, it would be time to change the course of this battle with a single, perfectly placed shot. The gunfight in the basement had been raging for 20 minutes, and the SEALs were losing ground fast.
Tank pressed himself against the concrete wall, feeling the vibrations from each bullet impact.
His rifle barrel was hot to the touch from continuous firing, and his ammunition was running dangerously low.
"Ramirez, how many rounds you got left?" he called across the room. "Maybe 30, came the reply. "Martinez is down to his last magazine." Sarah crawled between the wounded men, trying to keep everyone functional. Williams had taken another hit, this one in the thigh.
The bullet had missed the femoral artery by inches, but he was losing blood fast.
Martinez was still conscious despite the shrapnel in his leg, but his movements were getting sluggish.
"I need you to apply pressure here," she told Jackson, positioning his hands on Williams's wound.
"Don't let up, no matter what happens."
The enemy fighters had learned to respect the Americans' marksmanship. After losing 4 men in the initial assault, they'd pulled back and were now using a more cautious approach. Grenades first, then suppressing fire, then a quick advance under cover of smoke. Hayes tried his radio again, hoping for some miracle contact with friendly forces. Nothing but static. They were completely on their own, and the enemy knew it. "Boss, we need to talk about our options," Tank said during a brief lull in the fighting.
Hayes nodded grimly.
They both knew what options they had left.
Surrender wasn't one of them. Not after what they'd done to captured Americans in the past.
That left fighting to the death or trying to break out through superior numbers.
"How many you count outside?" Hayes asked. Tank had been keeping track since the fighting started. "At least 20, maybe 25.
They've got us surrounded on all sides. Snipers on the high ground, machine gun nests covering the approaches.
It's a professional setup."
Sarah paused in her work to listen. She could hear voices outside, speaking Arabic in calm, controlled tones.
These weren't excited jihadists screaming about martyrdom.
These were soldiers following orders, coordinating their movements like a real military unit. "Who are these guys?" she asked quietly.
Tank had been wondering the same thing.
The tactics, the equipment, the discipline, this wasn't typical of local insurgent groups.
Foreign fighters, maybe. Mercenaries. Could be Iranian special forces. The implications were serious.
If this was an official military operation by a foreign government, it meant the political stakes were much higher than a simple hostage situation.
Another grenade came bouncing down the stairs.
Everyone took cover as it exploded, filling the air with concrete dust and metal fragments. When the smoke cleared, Sarah saw that Jackson had been hit in the arm by shrapnel. "Let me see," she said, moving to examine the wound. "I'm fine, Doc," Jackson insisted, but his sleeve was already soaked with blood.
"You're not fine. Sit down and let me work." As Sarah treated Jackson's wound, she couldn't help but think about her training. All those hours learning battlefield medicine, trauma surgery, mass casualty procedures.
But nothing had prepared her for this level of intensity.
In training, the wounded patients stayed still and didn't shoot back. Tank counted his remaining ammunition.
18 rounds in his current magazine, plus 2 more full magazines.
Maybe 60 rounds total. In a prolonged firefight, that wasn't much. He'd need to make every shot count.
Movement, Martinez called from his position near the far window. Through the smoke and dust, they could see shapes moving outside. The enemy was repositioning for another assault, probably their final one. They'd tested the Americans' defenses and found them weak. Now it was time to finish the job.
Hayes made a decision that went against every instinct he had. "We need to conserve ammunition. Single shots only. Make them count." It was a desperate measure.
In training, they'd been taught to suppress enemy positions with overwhelming firepower. But, with limited ammunition and no resupply possible, they had to change tactics. Sarah finished bandaging Jackson's arm and moved back to Williams. His breathing was shallow, and his skin was pale from blood loss. She'd done everything she could with the supplies available, but he needed proper medical attention soon. "How you doing, Doc?" Williams asked weakly. "Better than you," she replied, trying to keep her voice light. "Just stay with me, okay? Don't go anywhere." Williams managed a weak smile. "Wasn't planning on it." The next assault came without warning. 6 fighters rushed down the stairs simultaneously, hoping to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. Tank's first shot took down the lead man, but the others kept coming. The basement erupted in close-quarters combat. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like strobe lights. The concrete walls amplified every sound until it became a deafening roar of gunfire and shouting. Sarah drew her pistol and fired at a fighter who'd made it halfway across the room. Her first shot missed, but her second caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Tank finished him with a headshot before he could recover. "Nice shooting, Doc," Tank yelled over the noise. But Sarah was already moving, helping Martinez return fire while Jackson tried to stop the bleeding from his own wound. This wasn't the passive role she'd been assigned. This was survival. When the smoke cleared, 3 more enemy fighters were down, but the cost had been high. Martinez was unconscious from blood loss, and Jackson could barely hold his rifle. They were running out of able-bodied fighters. Hayes took stock of their situation. 3 men seriously wounded, ammunition running low, no chance of resupply or rescue. In military terms, they were what was called combat ineffective. Unable to accomplish their mission or defend their position. "Tank, we need to move," he decided. "Staying here is just going to get us all killed." Tank nodded, though he knew their options were limited. The stairs were covered by at least 2 sniper positions. Anyone who tried to leave would be cut down before they made it 10 feet. "What about the walls?" Sarah suggested. "Could we blast our way out?" Tank had been thinking the same thing. The bomb-making materials scattered around the room included enough plastic explosive to punch a hole through the concrete wall. But the explosion would probably kill anyone in the immediate vicinity. "It's risky," he said. "We'd have to time it perfectly, and even then." "It's better than sitting here waiting to die," Hayes said. While Tank examined the explosive materials, Sarah continued working on the wounded. Martinez had regained consciousness but was in bad shape. The shrapnel in his leg had damaged muscle and possibly bone. He could move, but not quickly. "Doc, I can still fight," Martinez insisted. "You can barely stand," Sarah replied. "Save your strength." Outside, the enemy was regrouping for what would probably be their final assault. They'd taken heavier casualties than expected, but they still had overwhelming numerical superiority. The next attack would likely succeed. Tank had rigged a crude explosive device using the available materials. It wasn't pretty, but it should be enough to blow a hole in the exterior wall. The problem was timing the explosion to avoid the enemy snipers outside. "How long do we have?" Hayes asked. Tank listened to the sounds outside. Footsteps, voices, the metallic sounds of weapons being prepared. "Maybe 5 minutes before they come again." Sarah helped the wounded men prepare to move. Williams was the most serious case. He'd lost a lot of blood and could barely walk. Jackson was mobile but weak. Martinez was somewhere in between. "I'll carry Williams," Tank offered. "No," Sarah said firmly. "You're our best shooter. You need both hands free." "I'll help him." Hayes looked at the young corpsman with new respect. She'd proven herself in the firefight, and now she was volunteering for the most dangerous job. Getting the wounded to safety while under sniper fire. "You sure about this, Doc?" Sarah checked her pistol one more time. She'd used 6 rounds in the last firefight, leaving 9 in the magazine. "Not much, but it would have to do." I didn't come this far to give up now, she said. Tank positioned the explosive charge against the exterior wall, calculating the best placement to create an opening large enough for them to escape through. The blast would be loud and would immediately alert every enemy fighter to their escape attempt. Once this goes off, we have maybe 30 seconds before they zero in on our position, he warned. Everyone moves fast, no hesitation. Hayes assigned positions. Tank would go first, clearing the immediate area. Sarah would help Williams through the opening. Jackson and Martinez would follow under their own power. Hayes would bring up the rear, covering their retreat. Remember, we're not trying to fight our way out, Hayes emphasized. We're trying to run. Get to the extraction point and wait for pickup. The extraction point was a flat area about half a mile away where a helicopter could land. In their current condition, with wounded men and limited ammunition, it might as well have been on the moon. Tank checked his watch. 30 seconds. Sarah took Williams's arm and helped him stand. He was weak but determined. I can make it, document, don't worry about me. I'm not worried, Sarah lied. Just stick close and do what I tell you. The explosion shattered the night silence. The concrete wall disintegrated, leaving a jagged opening about 4 feet wide. Tank went through first, his rifle up and ready. Clear, he called back. Sarah helped Williams through the hole, trying to shield him with her body as they moved. The opening led to a narrow alley between buildings, temporarily out of sight from the main sniper positions. Jackson came next, followed by Martinez, who was moving on pure willpower. Hayes brought up the rear, pausing to toss a grenade back through the opening to discourage pursuit. They'd made it outside, but they were far from safe. The enemy would react quickly to their escape attempt, repositioning their forces to cut off all possible routes to the extraction point. Tank led them down the alley, moving as quickly as their wounded would allow. The night air felt cool after the stifling atmosphere of the basement, but Sarah barely noticed. All her attention was focused on keeping Williams upright and moving. Contact rear. Hayes called out. Enemy fighters had discovered their escape route and were following them through the hole in the wall. Hayes dropped to one knee and returned fire, buying the others precious seconds to increase their lead. The alley opened onto a larger street, and, suddenly, they were exposed to sniper fire from multiple directions. Tank immediately spotted at least 3 muzzle flashes from elevated positions around the compound. Sniper, 2 o'clock, he called out, diving for cover behind an abandoned car. A bullet cracked past Sarah's head, so close she could feel the wind from its passage. She pulled Williams down behind a low wall, her heart racing. This was nothing like the controlled environment of the basement. Out here, they were targets in a shooting gallery. Martinez tried to return fire, but his wounded leg gave out, sending him sprawling in the dirt. Jackson crawled over to help him, leaving a trail of blood from his arm wound. They were pinned down again, only now they were in the open with minimal cover. The extraction point was still hundreds of yards away, and they were leaving a clear trail for the enemy to follow. Hayes made it to their position, breathing hard. We can't stay here. They'll have us surrounded in minutes. Tank scanned the terrain ahead, looking for the best route to the extraction point. The path was across open ground with virtually no cover. In daylight, it would have been suicide. In darkness, it was only marginally better. There, he pointed to a dry creek bed about 50 yards to their left. If we can make it to that wadi, we can follow it most of the way to the LZ. Sarah looked at Williams. He was conscious but barely. The movement had reopened his wounds, and his bandages were soaked with fresh blood. He wouldn't survive much more of this. Can you make it that far? She asked him quietly. Williams nodded, though they both knew it was probably a lie. Do what you have to do, document, don't let me slow everyone down. Sarah felt a surge of anger. Not at Williams, but at the situation. At the politicians who'd sent them here. At the intelligence officers who'd walked them into a trap. At everyone who was safe and comfortable while good people were dying in this godforsaken place. Nobody gets left behind, she said firmly. That's not how this works.
Tank was preparing to move when a new sound reached their ears. The distinctive whine of an incoming mortar round. The enemy had brought in heavy weapons, and they were about to start dropping high explosives on their position. Move! 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 Hayes shouted. They broke from cover just as the first mortar round impacted where they'd been hiding seconds before. The explosion showered them with dirt and debris, but they kept running toward the creek bed. Sarah half-carried, half-dragged Williams across the open ground. Bullets cracked around them, some so close they could hear the sonic booms. Behind them, more mortar rounds were falling, walking closer to their position with each shot. Tank reached the creek bed first and immediately set up a defensive position to cover the others. The dry streambed was about 6 feet deep and offered good concealment from ground-level observers, but it wouldn't stop mortar rounds. One by one, the others tumbled into the relative safety of the wadi. Jackson and Martinez made it under their own power, though both were moving slowly. Hayes dove in just as another mortar round exploded on the rim above them. Sarah checked Williams's condition. The run had cost him dearly. His pulse was weak and thready, and his breathing was becoming labored. He was going into shock from blood loss. "Stay with me," she whispered, checking his bandages. They were completely soaked through, and she had no more medical supplies to replace them. Tank was studying the route ahead. The creek bed ran roughly in the direction of the extraction point, but it wasn't a straight line. They'd have to navigate several bends and at least one area where the banks were too low to provide adequate cover. "How far to the LZ?" Hayes asked. Tank checked his GPS device. "About 400 yards. Maybe 10 minutes if we move fast." "We can't move fast," Sarah pointed out. "Williams needs medical attention, and Martinez isn't much better." Hayes looked at their situation objectively. They had 2 men who could barely walk, ammunition was running low, and the enemy was closing in from multiple directions. Every minute they delayed gave their pursuers more time to set up blocking positions. "We split up," he decided. "Tank, you and Jackson push ahead to the LZ. Get on the radio and call for immediate extraction. The rest of us will follow at best speed." Tank didn't like the idea of dividing their already small force, but it made tactical sense. If the extraction helicopter arrived to find the LZ under enemy control, everyone would die. "Give us 5 minutes, then follow," he said. Tank and Jackson disappeared into the darkness, moving fast and quiet along the creek bed. Sarah could hear distant gunfire as enemy fighters continued searching for them, but for the moment they seemed to have lost the trail. Martinez was trying to help with Williams, but his own wounds were slowing him down. "Doc, I don't think I can carry him much further." Sarah looked at Williams. He was unconscious now, his breathing shallow and irregular. In a proper medical facility, he might have a chance. Out here, with no supplies and no surgical equipment, he was dying. "We're not giving up," she said firmly. "Help me get him on my back." Hayes watched the young corpsman struggle to lift a man who outweighed her by at least 50 pounds. Her determination was admirable, but the mathematics were simple. They weren't going to make it. "Doc," he said gently, "maybe it's time to think about no." Sarah's voice was steel. "We don't leave people behind. That's what makes us different from them." She managed to get Williams into a fireman's carry, though the weight nearly buckled her knees. Hayes and Martinez took positions on either side, ready to support her if she fell. They began moving along the creek bed, much slower than Tank and Jackson but still making progress toward the extraction point. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were getting closer. Sarah's legs were shaking from the effort of carrying Williams, but she forced herself to keep moving. Each step was agony, and she could feel her strength ebbing away. But she thought about all the soldiers who'd died because no one could reach them in time. Williams wasn't going to be one of them. The creek bed curved to the right, bringing them closer to the extraction point but also exposing them to observation from higher ground. Hayes spotted movement on the ridge above them and signaled for everyone to freeze. 3 enemy fighters were moving along the rim of the wadi, clearly searching for their trail.
They were close enough that Sarah could hear their voices as they discussed where the Americans might have gone. One of them pointed directly at their position. Hayes brought up his rifle, knowing that opening fire would give away their location to every enemy fighter in the area. But, if they'd been spotted, they had no choice. The fighter raised his weapon, preparing to fire down into the creek bed. Hayes had a clear shot and was about to take it when something unexpected happened. A single rifle shot cracked across the valley, and the enemy fighter's head exploded in a spray of blood and bone. His body toppled forward into the creek bed, landing just a few feet from where Sarah was hiding. The other two fighters spun around, trying to locate the source of the shot. Another rifle cracked, and the second man went down. The third fighter broke and ran, abandoning his dead comrades. Hayes looked around in confusion. Tank and Jackson were still ahead of them, moving toward the extraction point. None of his team had fired those shots. So who was covering them? Sarah was too exhausted to wonder about their mysterious guardian angel. Williams was growing heavier with each step, and she could feel her strength giving out. But the extraction point was close now, maybe another 100 yards. Martinez touched her shoulder. "Doc, let me try to carry him for a while." Sarah wanted to refuse, but she could barely stand. Reluctantly, she helped transfer Williams to Martinez, who struggled under the weight but managed to keep moving. They could hear Tank's voice ahead of them, talking rapidly into his radio. The extraction helicopter was inbound, but it would be several more minutes before it arrived. Several minutes they might not have. Enemy fighters were converging on the area from multiple directions, drawn by the sounds of gunfire and the knowledge that their quarry was escaping. The race was on to reach the extraction point before the trap closed completely. Sarah drew her pistol and checked the chamber. 9 rounds left. Not much, but she was ready to use every one of them to protect her wounded teammates. The ghost sniper watched through his scope as the Americans struggled toward their extraction point. He'd been tracking their movement since they escaped from the compound, providing overwatch and eliminating threats as they appeared. Soon, he would have to make a choice that would change everything.